everyone, and welcome to our 5th episode of Ladies, Lipstick, and Litigation. This episode brought to you by Bourbon and Branding Issues. It's very cold and snowy here in Milwaukee, so we thought let's do something that is meant to keep you warm. This episode also inspired by a recent visit to Nashville, at which time I got to taste a lot of lovely whiskeys and bourbons, which are not for me, but apparently good for other people like Heidi, who loves whiskey, and I can't. But my boyfriend came in and said, "Hey, for your next lipstick show, you guys should talk about maker's bottles." And he held up the red wax, and I said, "No, that's not really." And then I said, "No, that would be really fun to talk about." So in the past, we have talked about several trademark issues and different trademark cases, particularly related to color and parodies and other things like that, and some counterfeit. But we're going to also talk about in future episodes other ways to protect your products and brands, such as copyrights, trade dress, trade secrets, and patents. So we have a guest star, Christy McLean, with us today, who will be talking about the patenting process, which I'm sure she'll correct me on that term because I can't speak English. And we will talk about the various ways that you can protect your product and IP. So first, to just give a general overview of all of the things that I just mentioned, I'm going to hand it off to Heidi, and then we'll go to Christy to talk about the different ways that you can patent your method, your bottle making, I'm making things up, so she'll tell you what you can patent, and listen to her and not me on that. So Heidi, off to you.
Thanks, Janess. As you've noted, we've talked a lot about copyright and trademark so far in this show, and that's perhaps because I specialize in those areas and love them. But really, when you have thousands of products at the grocery store, there are actually a lot of different aspects of IP involved, and that might actually overlap in order to protect those products that you see on the shelf at the store or might even have in a bottle at home. So for our case in point today, as Janess mentioned, we will be talking about the Maker's Mark bottle. So here is a lovely picture of the Maker's Mark bottle. And for a quick overview, a couple of different types of IP protection we're going to talk today are trademarks, which includes, as we've kind of discussed before, names, slogans, and logos. And also includes things like product design, product packaging, and possibly more obscure things like color, smell, and sound. We have Christy here today to talk to us about design patents and utility patents. We also are going to cover copyright and trade secret. So that's a long list of things, but we'll kind of give you a quick overview of them all and how they might be able to protect your own products. So turning first to trademarks, there are a lot of trademarks involved in the single Maker's Mark bottle. Perhaps the most obvious one that people would think of is the name Maker's Mark, which is the core brand. However, there are also other trademarks, including slogans like Generations of Proof, the logo on their whiskey bottle, and then also, in addition to their core whiskey product, Maker's Mark, I did not know this until researching for this, offers other types of products like chocolates and sauces, fruits preserved in alcohol, and even bar and restaurant services. So even if you have a core product, it's a good idea to think about, do you have other products that you might want to protect? Or do you have other services that you might offer under the same mark that you might want trademark registration protection for?
Is there a reason we did not get the chocolates for this episode?
I guess that will be determined in another episode, perhaps. We'll have to come back to that one.
Well, fine. I am offended.
Continue. I'll work on it, I promise. So in addition to those delicious chocolates, and kind of those traditional word marks, so trademarks and slogans, Maker's Mark very famously has this red wax seal on their bottles, which is a red dripping wax. And actually they have trademark protection for this. As you can see in these pictures, they have registrations for different variations of applying wax seals with drips to their product packaging. One of the things about protecting product packaging or product design is that it has to be distinctive, and product packaging and product design is not inherently distinctive. So while things like the dripping red seal on a Maker's Mark bottle is registrable, the company has to build up consumer recognition over time. And in order to register the mark, they may have to submit evidence like consumer studies, marketing and ad spends, sales figures, and things like that. So it's a good idea to think about kind of what features of your product packaging or product itself might be distinguishable, and then how to kind of build up consumer recognition in those over time for trademark protection. However, I'm going to switch it over to Christy because, as I understand, design patents do not require evidence of consumer recognition. So one of the benefits they may have is that you might be able to get a design patent for a product packaging or product design while you're waiting to build up that consumer recognition and get trademark protection.
That's definitely right, Heidi. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm a big fan. So, for example, the bottle in Maker's Mark that you've already been looking at, it has that kind of squarish shape with the rounded top. So that's something, if you looked around, I don't know, the market and see, oh, this is an original design. It's not obviously similar to other bottles that are already out there. It's something that could be covered by a design patent, because design patents are really there to protect the appearance and not the function, which is where utility patents will come in later when I speak about that. So theoretically, you could protect this bottle. I don't know that it looks extremely different from everything out there, but it is a possibility. I will give you the example of the original Coke bottles. Everyone knows what they looked like. They have a very specific shape, and nothing had looked like that before. So Coke had a design patent, and now they last for 15 years. It used to be different, but once their design patent ran out, it wasn't like everyone could just take their bottle and make it look like a Coke bottle. They couldn't, because then it was protected by trade dress because it was well associated with Coke. So it is maybe a good idea and a potentially winning strategy to get a design patent if you have a really great idea for, this is a container, but for other designs related to your product, and then it'll give you time to build up that association with your brand, as Heidi said, which is great if you're looking for protection at the beginning. Another area that that Heidi already mentioned too, the little stamp logo on the bottle. A design patent doesn't have to protect, the whole product. It can protect a portion of your product. So that little piece with the S and the 4, that looks like nothing I've seen elsewhere. So that could easily be part of the design on the bottle that is protectable itself, not just the bottle as a whole, but that specific portion through a design patent. Now, I'm not a whiskey maker, but there are definitely aspects of that process that could be protected by a utility patent. So a utility patent is similar to a design patent, that you're looking for something new and non-obvious, but in the case of utility patents, it has to be functional. So the red wax, if it improved the sealing on the bottle and made it so, oh, our product stays really fresh because we have this inventive sealing process, then you can protect that with the utility patent. And utility patents last longer than a design patent. They last for 20 years from your filing, give or take. Sometimes you can get an extension, but that gets a little technical. You could also protect like how you bottle it. So they have a great process or an improved assembly line that they can get their whiskey from their barrels into their bottles in a faster or efficient way. That could be something you could cover with a utility patent. There are kind of endless, new improvements. That's the kind of stuff that you cover with a utility patent. So,
Christy, one question I have for probably both of you here is, you mentioned the functionality of if the red wax was used to properly seal the top or be some sort of sealing agent, it has to be functional in order for it to meet that requirement as a patent. Comparatively, if something is purely aesthetically functional, it cannot be registered as a trademark, right, Heidi?
So if something is functional, then generally it cannot be protected as a trademark. Usually if there is a utility patent for a particular, a utility patent for something, generally you cannot go and try and get a trademark later. There is a really famous case, I believe, with traffic cones that kind of bent over as a way, to keep people from running over them. And when the utility patent ran out, they went to the trademark office and tried to say, we're registering for trade dress. The Supreme Court ultimately ruled that they could not, due to the functionality, and also because the purpose of patents, Christy, please correct me if I'm wrong, is really to promote ingenuity and to foster creativity. And so kind of allowing people this mechanism to have a utility patent and then say, oh wait, I want more protection, let me go grab a trademark, which can be registered indefinitely so long as it's in use, would kind of really inhibit that creativity that was the whole reason for having patents in the first place.
So it's an interesting question, because in Maker's Mark was in litigation for about 10 years with Jose Cuervo related to a red dripping wax, where Jose Cuervo had introduced a bottle that had the same red wax. And Jose Cuervo made the argument that the red dripping wax was aesthetically functional and therefore not protectable. And the district court in Kentucky and the Sixth Circuit agreed that, or disagreed with that assertion, saying that, there's more than one way to seal a bottle with wax to make it look appealing. You don't only have to use red wax. So it's kind of an interesting play there, that if makers had used that wax as a method of sealing, perhaps it wouldn't be entitled to the same protection on the color red and the drip marks that it hand does, or that is hand dipped for each and every bottle. Just an interesting thing to think about.
Definitely, and that's a great point, Janess, that all of these different types of IP we're talking about, it's not like they're necessarily siloed, or that if you have a product or service, it can only be protected by trademark or copyright or patent. A lot of times these interact with one another, and as Christy mentioned, you can kind of use them together as a strategy to protect your product or service throughout its life, from its beginning to when it is more recognized in the marketplace.
Well, Christy, one thing that you mentioned was the little logo, and I know we haven't looked into particularly whether that logo has any kind of design patent on it. Why would a company choose a design patent over a copyright, or vice versa, for those kinds of design elements? And Heidi, that probably is a question for both of you.
Sure. So really, a design patent, like I said, it's different from copyright, and that copyright is looking more at, I think Heidi could probably explain this better, but it's more expression than just the appearance, which is, I think, the focus of a design patent. So this is a pretty small piece, but on other bottles, you could see like more ornate bottles that have like ridges, or, I don't know, like cutouts to really make them very different in appearance. And so that is probably a better example for where you would want a design patent on, like maybe a really cool portion of your bottle, than this, which, as Heidi said, does have a trademark and is, I don't know, it's maybe less worthwhile to have a design patent, but is definitely still protectable because, as I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be the whole, it can be little portions of the bottle. So as more of a, this is an example of how you could have a design patent that, you know, protects a small piece.
Thanks, Christy. And for copyright protection, copyright really focuses on original works of authorship that are fixed in a tangible means of expression. So I know I'm literally quoting the law right there, but I guess the best way to explain it is, for example, we all know what a chair is. Like, a chair is not copyrightable. The idea of a chair is not copyrightable. But if you come up with a really cool chair with a really interesting like backrest or functions differently or is somehow unique and original, that might be protected by copyright. And there are other aspects related to this Maker's Mark bottle that we keep coming back to that could be protected by copyright. I was thinking in particular advertisements related to it, whether that be advertisements that you might see in magazines or banner ads or the Super Bowl's coming up, perhaps something like a Super Bowl commercial. So Janessa, I know you do a lot of advertising work. Would you maybe want to talk about how advertising and protection for copyright might play into kind of protecting the overall branding for a product like this?
Absolutely. So in general, an advertisement cannot be misleading in any way. And one of the things that people use in advertisements is these copyrights, these trademarks to reinforce and foster that relationship between a consumer and the brand. So you will see, you know, makers, you're going to see, arguably, you'd see the red wax, you would see, you can't actually show anyone drinking alcohol, but you know, you could see someone enjoying the smell or enjoying a bottling experience where you get to hand dip these kinds of things. And you use your copyrights and your trademarks in order to reach your consumers. In certain cases, even patents, where you talk about your, you know, your 100 years of distilling experience, and you have a special process by which you harvest your rye or whatever, you know, it might be. And so you talk about those kinds of things, and inherently the consumer is not really going to understand that that's what you mean. But really what you're doing is you're referencing all your different intellectual property protections that either make you stand out for your distilling process because you have a utility patent on that, or your bottling process because you have another patent on that, or your, you know, the shape of your bottle or the dipping of the wax because it makes you stand out as something special and additional. So while you can't do anything that might be misleading to a consumer or make any kinds of representations that way, there are plenty of ways to highlight in advertisements, commercials, even product packaging is considered an advertisement. Really anything that goes on a product or is related to a product that influences a consumer's right to purchase, that we can reinvigorate or, you know, reinforce and reintroduce all of these IP concepts in order to foster that relationship and have consumers have a greater recognition of you, because that's the point of IP, is to protect yourself and hopefully expand or protect your little market share there.
Thanks, Janess. And I was kind of thinking of, now that we've talked about trademarks, copyrights, patents, some advertising issues, what happens if you have an aspect of your product or service that doesn't necessarily fall within one of these categories or doesn't qualify for the type of protection we've talked about? For example, recipes are generally not copyrightable because they are seen as essentially lists of instructions, and they don't have enough originality in order to meet the requirement to be copyrighted, unless you have, you know, very verbose language that's super unique. So for example, if there is a recipe that says mix this much rye with this much water, that wouldn't necessarily be protected by copyright. But obviously the formula or the process for making Maker's Mark, I would imagine, is very important to Maker's Mark. So one last thing we haven't quite talked about yet is trade secret. And that's kind of associated with intellectual property. And that includes anything that has information that has potential or actual economic value, and is subject to reasonable efforts to maintain the secrecy of the information. And it has values to your competitors who cannot otherwise obtain the information. So I was wondering, Janess, perhaps can you think of any other trade secrets that might be related to, since you just visited some distilleries yourself, that might be a good example of sorts of information a company might want to protect related to their product?
Sure. I mean, you've talked about recipes, and what I'm going to talk about kind of ties into that. But the quantities of the different ingredients, the temperatures at which they, well, I'm explaining this horribly, which is why I'm not a distiller. The temperatures at which they heat and maintain the product in order to age it. The method of aging, which I think probably that might actually cross into a patent area, maybe, Christy. It could, I guess. Uh, and how they keep their barrels, all of those kinds of things that would be trade secrets. Sometimes customer information can be, that's not really related to this in particular. But yeah, the way that they grow their crops that go into it, the way that they harvest that, which also steps into utility patents if there are specific measures that they're using. But that's what I took from most of it. Sometimes they have shapes of glasses, again, stepping into utility patents there, or design patents, a little bit of both. Shapes of glasses that are designed to aerate, different alcohols or different wines, whiskeys, whatever, in a certain method so that it impacts the way you drink it, and the taste that you get. So some of those could be subject to trade secret, assuming that they're not protectable under other circumstances, or they could be even if they are protectable. So Christy, do you have any thoughts on those kinds of that overlap there between what can be considered a trade secret and particularly probably utility patents?
Yes, that's a really good point, Janess, in that a lot of what you can patent is also the same stuff that you can make a trade secret, which makes it so you need to be really intentional with your IP strategy, because patents, you get the right to exclude, but it's an exchange for disclosure. So you kind of have to tell everybody everything, and you get your 20 years to say, nope, you're excluded from doing this the way I do it. But when it's up, then it's already out there and everybody knows it, as opposed to if you make the decision to say, well, this is our secret recipe, and we are, well, not recipe because we talked about that, but this is our secret composition, and this specific hybrid of, I don't know, whatever we're using in our distillation process, you can keep that secret. And as long as you are careful and do everything you need to keep your trade secret, including, contracts and all of that, so that people don't disclose it, you get way more than 20 years. So it's a trade-off and something that you have to decide whether in the long term you really never want that information to come out or not, in which case you don't want a patent.
That's a really good point that I hadn't necessarily thought of. So thank you for bringing that up. So we've gone through quite a few ways to protect, one simple, small looking bottle today. And in the future episodes, we will talk more in depth about those ways of protecting your brand and using it both offensively and defensively to protect your position here. But that's all we've got for today. So thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Christy, for being our guest star. We appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you in some future episodes. And now that it's blizzarding even more outside, I think it's probably time to have a little whiskey or brandy old fashioned to warm up because we're in Wisconsin. So thank you all. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.